Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming in from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing in the news, behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Judeo-Christian civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that'll determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you that the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, and supporters of the station you listen to. They're my views. For this evening, they're going to be the views of Pastor David Whitney, and I'm going to tell you that we are making tremendous advances. There's beginning to be a change in America. And during this recent Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin trial, why, of course, the media kept showing these pictures of this little 12-year-old black boy, nice little boy, shot by this wicked white man. Of course, he happened to be Hispanic, but that really didn't matter. They were trying to create an impression in our minds. This little helpless boy, they didn't show this great big hulking 17-year-old who'd been arrested for all sorts of violent acts in the past. He has certainly committed acts of violence and been involved with the law. They didn't bring that out. Everything was trying to get a race war going between blacks and whites, and they didn't succeed. An awful lot of black people and white people saw what they were doing through the media and wouldn't fall for it. President Obama, with the help of the entire controlled media, couldn't generate any support here for a war with Syria to justify attacking Syria. He couldn't get support from the United Nations, even the Arab League, or certainly Germany or England, or all throughout the world, why people just didn't want to get involved in another war, no matter all the atrocity stories they told us and all the pictures they showed us of the people dying from chemical warfare, but of course they never had any evidence that Assad did it, and they were not able to get us into a war. And it is this sort of thing that we're seeing increasingly. People are not going along with the media and all of their plans to control our reality. In fact, we've been working for almost a decade with the Institute and the Constitution and tried to teach people how to begin to teach others about our Constitution. And for the first time, we're getting an awful lot of marked increase in the number of people now taking the courses and taking other people into the courses, people beginning to learn our Constitution and understand the foundations of our freedom. David Whitney, thank you very much for being with us. And isn't that true? Isn't there a lot more interest than there has been before?
There is, and it's exciting to see because I think citizens are, as you say, waking up to the lies they're being sold daily by the controlled media and waking up to the lies that the government has been selling us for so long. And that's very encouraging because 10 years ago, I knew initially at least, a lot of people bought the lies about 9/11. The government story was accepted by most people, but now that acceptance of even that event 10 years ago is greatly eroded. Most people doubt that we've been told the truth, or at least been told really what took place, and there's a lot of uncertain details, but they suspect that they're being lied to, and that is a very positive step. The irony is that everybody in the Soviet Union knew what Pravda was. It wasn't truth, as the word implied. Instead, it was a lie. And so they knew anything that was being published by a government-run media was lying to them. It's just a ministry of propaganda. The problem in America is people took a long time to catch on to the idea that we have a ministry of propaganda that parades itself as if it's an independent media that is truly objective and not controlled by the same forces that control our government. And as you say, many are waking up to the reality that is not the case. It's a controlled media, a ministry of propaganda, if you will, and that the lies being told are dangerous to our liberty.
In fact, anybody who wants to read about that, we carry a book called The New Media Monopoly, written by a left-wing professor, but he's absolutely right. It's all controlled. Well, David, you go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stan. Our founders were wise because they believed what the Bible says. God's Word says in Romans chapter 3, verse 23, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." Every human being is a fallen creature. Now, yes, true, Some are redeemed by Christ, and they're on the road of sanctification. But even on that road, short of eternity, no one is perfect. And they concluded, rightly so, studying history and studying the development of English common law, they rightly concluded that you cannot trust anyone with unchecked power. That anyone who has power, being a fallen human being, even if they are on the road of sanctification, even if they are improving as a human being, you better not trust them with power because they are corruptible, and the conditions that will lead them to corruption are exactly the conditions of entrusting them with power. And that, as Lord Acton wisely said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So they wisely designed a system of government in which checks and balances were built into the structure so that no one had unchecked power. We often think of the three branches of government. That's the first evidence of that, but many people don't think of the other design they also clearly built into our system, the four levels. Yes, there's three branches, but there's four levels of government. There's federal, state, county, and then the most local might be a town or a township, depending on what part of the country you are in. But those four levels of government are also a check against the other levels of government. So if the federal government gets out of control, and I dare say it doesn't take much reading of the newspaper or listening to the news at all to see that the federal government is way out of control. If the federal government's out of control, our founders designed the state governments to step in and to interpose to protect their citizens from unlawful acts, that is, unconstitutional acts on the part of the federal government against the citizens in their state. They couldn't protect any other state, but their own state, their own jurisdiction, they certainly could protect. And then on the next level down, of course, in the county level, the sheriff, the chief law enforcement officer of the county, he has sworn an oath to the U.S. Constitution just as much as the governor of the state is, just as much as the president has, and he has a duty to protect the citizens within his jurisdiction, his county, from unlawful acts, that is, unconstitutional acts, either on the part of the state government or on the part of the federal government. He has a duty to interpose. And that structure was built in, and our founders were still concerned, even though four levels of government, three branches of government.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan and our guest, Pastor David Whitney, and he's certainly pointing out that the people who created America knew that men were corruptible. That's why you had to limit the power of government, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely everyone. And basically you need to understand that the whole concept of our government was the three set parts of our government, legislative, judicial, and certainly executive. They were to check on one another, but there were also four levels of government: the federal, the state, the county, and the local. And certainly the most powerful person in any community is the sheriff. He's elected. He is the county official. He's sworn to uphold the Constitution, and it is there certainly that he has the power to check even the power of the federal government. And this is what we must do. We must understand that our founding fathers created a system of checks and balances, knowing full well, as Pastor Whitney says, that men are corruptible. You could never trust them with power. That's why they wanted to limit the power of the federal government. They wanted to limit the power of the state governments. They wanted to limit the power of the county and the local governments so men could be free. Because our form of government would not work for any other than a moral and religious people. That's why they took God and prayer and the Ten Commandments out of our society, out of our schools, because they wanted, of course, to have an all-powerful government. And they realized, of course, the best way to do that was to destroy the moral fabric of our society, knowing full well that you'll either be ruled by God or ruled by tyrants. So they decided we were not going to be ruled by God, and that would give them the opportunity. And the really are people, ladies and gentlemen, want to control you, and most of them are generated and go to work for government very readily because that's how you can control others. Go right ahead, David.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stan. So even with that beautiful design of, if you count it up, that's 12 different offices. Some have more than one person in them. Obviously, Congress has 435 people. Or actually, if you had the Senate, 500 and so on. 535. But each of those boxes, you have 12 boxes, are supposed to be a check and balance against each other, jealous for the powers that have been entrusted to them, will protect the powers entrusted to them, not allow encroachment from any of the other boxes into their area. And yet they knew that even with all of those protections, there could come a day where a collusion would take place among the three branches of government, not only at the federal level, but also at the state level and at the county level, and even all the way down to the local level, the town level, that you might have a collusion between all 12 of those boxes of power that is granted by the people, and all 12 of those boxes might collude together in a secret agreement to steal the liberties of the people. And so they created what I would call a fourth branch of government. I'm not alone in calling it that. Justice Scalia has spoken of it in this way as well. And that is the jury, a citizen group of your peers, 12 citizens, who can look at a piece of legislation that the legislature has signed and say, oh, yeah, or passed, saying this is law. Then the executive branch has signed off, and we say, well, they signed it into law. And then the judicial branch weighs in and says, oh, yeah, that's law, that's constitutional, that's fine. And yet one juror out of 12 can stop that whole railroading of injustice and say, no, the law, we judge the law, and that's the job of the duty of the jury, to judge the law. We judge the law, or I judge the law, as unconstitutional. Therefore, this fellow citizen is not guilty of having violated a law, because this is not law at all. It is simply paper on which the legislature spilled ink and the governor signed, and the judiciary said, oh, that's fine. And Obamacare is perhaps a very relevant example of this. The legislature, in spite of the huge protest all over the country and the outcry against it, they passed it, and Obama, again, against huge outcry and protest, he signed it, and we all hoped that the Supreme Court would do the right thing and say, that's not law, that can't be constitutional, there's no way. We never gave the federal government any powers, read Article 1, Section 8, never gave them any powers to deal with the health care of the American people in any way, shape, or form. This is not constitutional, and it's not law. And what does the Supreme Court do? They said it was constitutional. Oh, they said this is perfectly legal. Well, no, it is not, and we, the citizens, know it is not, and it can be stopped at the level of the jury. And so there really are four branches of government, the jury on each of those four levels, and 4 levels, 4 branches, 16 boxes, but the jury box is perhaps the most powerful box, and it's therefore one that has been relentlessly attacked by the tyrants. They don't want anybody to know this truth about the power of the jury, because if it gets out, then jurors can stop unconstitutional law. Now, when we looked at the body of the Constitution, we said that as it was being considered and debated among the states, before quite a number of states would ratify this Constitution, they said there must be a Bill of Rights. We will only ratify it if there is a Bill of Rights immediately amended to the Constitution. And that agreement was struck, and that was the first task that Congress had as they met under the new Constitution. And so our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, are a precious treasure because they further restrict. They recognize, wait a minute, some of the language here in the Constitution might be too loosey-goosey, might allow things that we never intended to have happen. Therefore, this Bill of Rights further restricts the powers of Congress, the power of the executive, and the power of the judicial branch at the federal level. We've talked about the First Amendment. We've talked about the Second Amendment, 2 vitally important amendments in our Bill of Rights. But the Third Amendment is perhaps the most neglected and unknown of the 10 amendments. It simply says that that your house basically is your castle, this castle doctrine, that the government cannot house troops in your home. And that may sound like an odd issue because we never think of, the government troops. Well, they're going to be down there in the fort on the base. They would be living in barracks or whatever. Government provides them housing. They don't need to live in our houses. And so it's not an issue that we are all familiar with. And yet our founders were very concerned about this issue because that's exactly what happened during the War for Independence. King George III sent his lobsterbacks to live in the homes of the colonial citizens. And, of course, if you have a soldier, or usually it would be an officer, and his retinue with him in your home, who's going to sleep in the best bed in the house? Oh, the guy with the guns. Who's going to eat the best food out of your pantry? Well, the guy with the guns, and on and on. And in fact, terrible things happened as a result of soldiers being quartered in homes. I remember the great events of Christmas of 1776 when George Washington crossed that icy Delaware River and a surprise attack at Trenton, New Jersey, surprised the Hessians, defeated them, took them captive, and a great victory was won. But Washington, later that next year, in March of 1777, wrote to the governor of New Jersey, Governor Livingston, and he detailed information he had taken during the time that they were preparing for crossing the Delaware River to make their attack on Trenton. Intelligence that had been accurately recorded of 3 incidences of horrible rape that he knew happened in New Jersey. One in Pennington, New Jersey, a town that I grew up in and knew some of the history there. One awful rape of a mother and her daughter. Another of a woman that was pregnant. Another of a young girl raped by a multitude of soldiers. Just horrific examples of abuse when soldiers are quartered in citizens' homes. They not only take the food, they not only sleep in the bed and do whatever they please, then they do whatever they please with the women in those houses. And that horrible incident actually was to the advantage of our war for independence, because New Jersey up to that point in time had been very much a Tory state. That is, they generally supported the king. They were not willing to really raise troops and support the war efforts. They were kind of standoffish towards Washington. But after the news of these horrific rapes got out and made its circuits around New Jersey, a great number of militiamen came together and joined Washington's army to help defeat these wicked lobsterbacks, because the people recognized at that point, we've got to stand up and fight. We may not have been willing to fight for the food in our pantry or the use of our own homes, but when they rape our daughters and our wives, we will fight them to the last man. And so a great change took place, at least in that one state of New Jersey. And this illustrates to us what it takes sometimes for citizens to get off the couch. One of the greatest hindrances to liberty being restored in America today is so many Americans are comfortable. They don't care what the federal government does or even what their state government does, as long as it doesn't interfere with them. They got their 52-inch screen TV and a nice, comfortable, lazy boy recliner, and they like to watch sports and all these other things that entertain them and distract them. They don't care that liberties are being destroyed day by day. People are being imprisoned who should never be put in prison, and our rights are being stripped away. They don't care about any of that as long as they get to see the entertainment they want to watch and are comfortable and they get a paycheck coming in. And we need citizens who say, no, I am concerned when evil is being done to other people in our land. I am concerned when our rights are being stripped away, because I see my children and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. I realize that if I don't stand up and fight for liberty now, it will be lost.
And let me just point out, but basically, over in Syria, this is not a civil war. No matter what you're told, this is not a civil war. We have paid mercenaries in Stratford. You can go up on the internet, look at what Stratford has said about it, an English intelligence source. And basically, they will tell you about 25,000 Chechens. What are Chechens doing fighting over there? Why, they're paid mercenaries, ladies and gentlemen. There's about 20,000 people, certainly from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and then there's another 20,000 that are coming from certainly Iraq, and these are professional mercenaries. We hired about 80,000. Apparently, there were about 15,000 Syrians who wanted to rise up and join this army, and they were all taken out and executed by the Chechens. These are the people we're paying, ladies and gentlemen. We're paying them as they killed 100,000 civilians. They killed about 17,000 of the Syrians who defected to the Free Syrian Army. American tax dollars at work. American tax dollars at work. Go right ahead, David.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Stan. Yeah, the illustrations of tyranny And what we know is always the case in war. When they want to declare war, what they're really doing is they want to strip us of our liberties. Because every time war is declared, well, they don't declare war constitutionally anymore, but any time war is enacted, then what happens is further restrictions of our liberties take place at home. Just look at 9/11 and what has happened to destroy and erode our liberties here in the past 10 years. Well, this whole issue of the Third Amendment, many people say, well, that's interesting history. Yeah, okay, Washington faced this, and they had to deal with horrible things like rapes that took place as a result of quartering troops. But nobody worries about that today. The federal government's not going to put a troop of soldiers in my house and sleep in my bed. That won't happen. Well, the interesting thing is they've already prepared to do one aspect of that exact thing. Your food in your pantry. I wrote a blog on March 21st, 2012. If you want to read the whole details and get the links, you can go to the website theamericanview.com. theamericanview.com. Just hit the button there, commentaries, and you'll see David's blog right there below the commentaries. And go back to March 21st and 2012. It's entitled The Usurper-in-Chief. That's my name for the POTUS there. Usurper-in-Chief says your pantry belongs to him. Essentially what we have is Obama issuing a decree that month that seizes control of all food in America.
Now, basically, this is an executive order signed by the president, which Congress did not bother to certainly challenge. And basically, in the name of fighting terrorism, the president declared that he had the right to determine what would happen to all the food in America. And of course, if it's all the food in America, that includes the food in your cupboard. But go ahead.
And the amazing thing is all it takes for him to enact this is to say that there's well, not even emergency, don't have to declare emergency. All he has to say is this action will promote the national defense. Promote the national defense. That's a very vague phrase that could mean practically anything or for any reason at all. In this executive order, he says the power to seize and control and take over the resources is delegated first to the Secretary of Agriculture with respect to all food sources, food production facilities, livestock resources, veterinarian resources, plant health resources, domestic distribution, farm equipment, commercial fertilizer. Well, wait a minute. When somebody takes control of the entire food supply of a nation, when they say we are not going to allow anybody privately to have control of producing food, distributing food, you have a scenario that's extremely dangerous. We'll remember what Stalin did. This is a Stalinist move because Stalin knew that the rebels against him in Georgia, that region of the USSR at that time, would not surrender. And so what he did is he starved them into submission. 40 million dead Georgians it took until they finally caved in because he had absolute control over their food. And he starved them, and there was no natural reason for the famine that took place there. It was a purposely government concocted famine that would starve those people into submission. So we ought to beware when our government starts talking about taking control of all food, including all farm equipment.
Hold that thought. We'll be back here in just a moment with Pastor David Whitney. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and David is talking about this executive order that gives the president a complete control over all the food in America. Now, basically, so far, they haven't utilized this very much, but they have the power to do it because Congress did not challenge the executive order, and it is now certainly the law of the land that the president has the right to control certainly the production of food and all the fertilizer and all the food that's out there in the name of course, well, protecting us from those wicked terrorists who want to take away our freedom. Now, go right ahead, Pastor David.
So that was the Secretary of Agriculture, the powers that this executive order grants to him, and then the power to the Secretary of Energy with respect to all forms of energy. Think of that, all forms of energy, coal, electricity, gasoline. They could say, well, sorry, we need all the gasoline for our Army. You don't get any, citizens. You go to the pumps and they're dry. There's none for you. And then the Secretary of Health and Human Services with respect to all health care resources. And then the Secretary of Transportation with respect to all forms of civil transportation. So not only planes and buses and trains, but your automobile is included in that list as well. We're going to confiscate your automobile because you don't need it, but our Army needs it. We're going to use it in this war.
Well, basically, I think the thing is that none of these things have been implemented, but the law is there, and basically it's unconstitutional. Certainly it should be challenged, but the congressmen are afraid to take a stand because they know they'll be targeted. They'll be targeted certainly by the IRS. They will be immediately attacked by the establishment-controlled media. When they try to get reelected at the end of 2 years, why, they'll run other people against them, and they'll run all sorts of ads and all sorts of scandalous things. They can say whatever they want to, and the congressman has no ability to get the truth out because the media is controlled, and they can certainly destroy any congressman they want to, and they've done it many times. Go right ahead, Pastor David.
Then the next is the Secretary of Defense is given powers over all water resources. Think of that for a moment. All water resources. You have a well on your property and you pump your own water? Well, sorry. Secretary of Defense says, I need your water. Sorry, you don't get to drink any of that water. All forms of energy. Think of that. All forms of energy. Coal, electricity, gasoline. They could say, well, sorry, we need all the gasoline for our Army. You don't get any, citizens. You go to the pumps and they're dry. There's none for you. And then the Secretary of Health and Human Services with respect to all health care resources. And then the Secretary of Transportation with respect to all forms of civil transportation. So not only planes and buses and trains, but your automobile is included in that list as well. We're going to confiscate your automobile because you don't need it, but our Army needs it. We're going to use it in this war.
Well, basically, I think the thing is that none of these things have been implemented, but the law is there, and basically it's unconstitutional. Certainly it should be challenged, but the congressmen are afraid to take a stand because they know they'll be targeted. They'll be targeted certainly by the IRS. They will be immediately attacked by the establishment-controlled media. When they try to get reelected at the end of 2 years, why, they'll run other people against them, and they'll run all sorts of ads and all sorts of scandalous things. They can say whatever they want to, and the congressman has no ability to get the truth out because the media is controlled, and they can certainly destroy any congressman they want to, and they've done it many times. Go right ahead, Pastor David.
Then the next is the Secretary of Defense is given powers over all water resources. Think of that for a moment. All water resources. You have a well on your property and you pump your own water? Well, sorry. Secretary of Defense says, I need your water. Sorry, you don't get to drink any of that water that comes out of your own well. It belongs to my Army. You don't get any of it. And then the Secretary of Commerce with respect to all other materials, or just in case they miss something in our land that they say they can grab control of all other materials, all services and facilities, including all construction materials. Basically, this takeover is absolute.
But, of course, this is unconstitutional because the 10th Amendment and the 9th Amendment limit what the federal government can do to just those 18 things that are listed, certainly in Section 8 of Article 1 of the Constitution. But, you see, the average individual doesn't understand that. Nor do they understand that there's a small group of people who want to control everything in the world. That's why, of course, that they have certainly the massive American military, troops stationed in 130 nations, certainly over 800,000 foreign bases. These people want a dictatorship. They don't believe in the Constitution. They want to control the whole world. That's why we have the largest army in the world. In fact, we have an army that's larger than the next 10 major nations all put together. And we put out more money than they do for their military. Why? Because it's all about power. It's all about this one world government. And the fact that there's no outcry about this legislation, well, it's not legislation. It's simply an executive order, a decree by the people, Obama, who rules this nation. Now, of course, remember, he is simply a front man for what I call the Brotherhood of Darkness, this group of evil people who run things behind the scenes. And if you doubt that, you need to get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness. You need to get Gary Allen's book, certainly, entitled None Dare Call It Conspiracy, or read Professor Quigley, who is a liberal college professor who actually researched these people. But anyway, go right ahead, David.
Mm-hmm. Now, like you say, none of this has been implemented, but there's some signals that they're on it, working on it. For example, naturalnews.com reported, again, the blog if you want to get the link itself. But last year they reported that they interviewed a farmer in Central Texas, and this farmer openly stated on camera that FEMA had already started calling farms across Texas demanding an inventory list of all their crops and their seeds. What in the world? Why in the world would the federal government need a list of a farmer's crops and a list of his seeds? To take possession of them whenever they deem it appropriate to take possession of those food resources that belong to the farmer and not to the federal government.
Continually, little bit by little bit, gradually, more and more power to the federal government, Constitution, but most people don't understand the Constitution. We talk about it, or maybe they make it extremist after all. They were against the government. Some of our founding fathers were against the government. They wanted to limit the power of government because they trusted. And yet, of course, you speak out today, while you can solve rates and all these subversives. You find the government considers anybody who questions their power to be a subversive today.